again, everybody. It is time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I'm Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
And Chip, I am taking all my official and unofficial visits to Ohio State. Just want to put that out there.
All right.
In case anybody was wondering. Now, we're here to talk about Ohio State, obviously, and talk about the Buckeyes' big win in Bloomington, a place that has been a little bit difficult, a little bit of a sticky wicket in a few of the recent years, but we saw no trouble at all on Saturday night.
No, we didn't. I maybe you're of a different opinion, and that's okay if you are. I just kind of I wish Indiana was at full strength, based on kind of the preseason predictions. I know that this season hasn't gone the way that they were expecting and obviously hoping. And I'm not even including the fact that Michael Penix has been out and maybe out for the foreseeable future. But Jack Tuttle being knocked out relatively early in the game, it just kind of, I'm not saying that it took away from the victory, but I just, like I said, I would have liked to have seen Indiana playing at more of a full strength capacity versus what we saw Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly not going to be an easy night for Indiana regardless, but we don't really know how the game would have unfolded differently, perhaps if Tuttle hadn't been injured, or if they had some guys that were missing from the lineup. They were down a couple cornerbacks, I believe, in that game as well. So, one of the things that our guest told us last week was how Indiana's defense had been from good to great this year. And if they are good to great, I didn't see it on Saturday night. I think that Ohio State made it look pretty bad at times. But it's and I thought too, when he said that last week, I thought, well, I mean, in a few games they've looked really good defensively, but in other games they maybe have looked pretty pedestrian. But Ohio State didn't seem to have any issues with that. And that's the thing about college football, is no one's going to feel sorry for you when you're not at your best. I mean, we've seen it with Ohio State, and we see it with Ohio State's opponents.
Exactly. If there was, I don't want to call it a shining spot on Indiana's defense, but a player that I thought really represented himself well for the Hoosiers was linebacker Micah Mcfadden. He, even though they were getting blown out, I mean, he played hard throughout the entire game. And then near the end of the game, they zeroed in on the cast, the very large cast on his left hand. Just kind of speaks to his toughness and his dedication to his teammates and the program, being out there, still playing really hard, even though Indiana was woefully inadequate and unable to keep up with Ohio State.
For the old people out there like you and me, Chip, it was very reminiscent of Derek Eisenman.
Yeah, there you go. That's, a blast from the past.
Yeah.
Wow.
Big old pull from it's a deep cut right there.
Oh, big time. Big time.
So Ohio State went to Bloomington, and every week, it seems like we do this every year. We say, okay, well, we'll see. The competition's getting tougher. The competition's getting tougher. The competition's getting tougher. And it doesn't matter. Ohio State just seems to have an offense that doesn't care who you are or how you play or what players are on your team. They just go out and find a way to get it done. And the Buckeyes, Chip, rolled over the Hoosiers to the tune of 54-7. We felt like this might be one of those games that was a little more close and annoying for a half or maybe three quarters, but it was not. And so as a result, we are way off with our predictions, but with you picking 49-21 and me picking 42-20. So once again, we split the spoils, as you were closer to Ohio State's score and I was closer to Indiana's score. And usually it's been the other way around. Usually it's been that I've had the higher score for Ohio State and you've had the lower score for the opponent, and now we've switched roles, but with the same kind of result.
The scary part about Ohio State, the way that they scored against Indiana, is it could have been worse. I know that the commentators were making, some remarks about, oh, they've got to get CJ Stroud out of there. And I'm not saying that was incorrect. But when you think about, the fact that it was, Ohio State, when they put in Kyle McCord, when they put in Jack Miller, when they put in Evan Pryor, when they put in Marvin Harrison Jr., I mean, all of these guys, we've talked about this in the past, has nothing to do with Indiana, is, okay, you want Ohio State to play their offense. And I think Ryan Day, I mean, he wasn't throwing for the end zone, but he certainly wasn't telling those players to go in there and not play to their best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've seen some people complaining that Ohio State was still throwing the ball, but the bottom line is, we've talked about this before, you got a freshman quarterback who's already missed a game with an injury this year, and two people behind him with no experience. You have to get them reps when and where you can, and this is that kind of a place where you can do that relatively risk-free. So I will not ever fault a coach for trying to get his backups ready in case something happens to the starter, and especially when we already have seen that starter miss some time this year. So I don't think that was a problem. Certainly it was not a case of Ryan Day trying to run up the score and look impressive. It was just running his offense, getting his guys reps, and he did leave Stroud in longer than I thought he would, but he did do some subbing around him. Ryan Day has a very, consistent method, and that is, even in a blowout, he wants his team to come out, make adjustments at the half, and he wants to see a good drive to start the second half. And in this case, they came out and they didn't have a good drive to start the second half, so CJ Stroud ended up in the game longer, and he really almost ended up for the entire third quarter in the game because of the way that Indiana had a lengthy drive that ended in a fourth down failure. But he wanted to get him a successful drive and then get him off the field. And so he's got a method to his madness, and he would have liked to probably have gotten a quick touchdown to start the second half and gotten him out, but it didn't work out that way. So he was out there a little longer than he typically would be.
I don't know if you recall during the game, Jack Miller, when he was in late in the game, and I can't remember precisely, it was where he had the option to hand it to the running back or keep it, and he kept it, and then he was sacked. And then they showed Ryan Day on the sidelines not looking very happy, and I don't know who was the target of his displeasure. But the point being that, okay, we're going to run the offense. I guess this is just me, and maybe you have a different opinion. I agree with everything you said about, wanting to see the players perform and getting them reps. The only thing that I possibly would have done differently is late in the fourth quarter, you're already up 51-7, is on, I think it was like a 4th and 6, and they kicked a field goal. And I thought, okay, you've already got more than enough points. A part of me was kind of like, why don't you just run the ball? And if you get the first down, that's more on Indiana. It's not your. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's all. But it's like now we're really we're looking for, we're looking for flaws on Miss America right now. It's like, okay, yeah. Like, come on now.
And I think he would have gone for it had he kicked a field goal earlier in the game, but he hadn't. So I think he wanted to get a rep for the field goal unit, and so it's hard to fault him. But also, that would have been a good opportunity, a situational rep for the backups to say, okay, that you need this first down to keep the to keep your chances alive. Give them a scenario. It's 4th and 6. You need this play to keep the game going and to have a chance to win and see what they go out there and do. I mean, that's part of coaching too. And yeah, he didn't look happy with Jack Miller on that play. I think it was because of the read. They talked about it during the game. Ryan Day has very high standards, and he's very intense all the time. And that's because that's what it takes to stay at that level. You see teams all over the place. They have a good year. Maybe they have 3 or 4 good years, and then they fall back into mediocrity. And the way that you avoid that is you have to maintain that level. That you have to demand excellence. You have to demand intensity. And you have to do it in a way that doesn't wear out your players. And I think that a few It's not a secret. You can look around the country and see which programs they are. A few programs have that figured out and how to do it and how to maintain that balance, and Ohio State is one of them.
I agree with you. I think Ryan Day's intensity is definitely something that the team responds to. And as we've discussed previously, I think anytime any of the backups get in, they're going to want to play their best to impress the coaching staff and try to increase their opportunities for playing time.
Mm-hmm. So the game started with Trayvon Henderson getting dinged up, and Ryan Day said it was nothing serious. He was being a little cautious, and he didn't play for a while after that. He did come back in the game and get some touches and get some plays and even score some touchdowns, but they gave it to Mayan Williams early and often. Mayan Williams started the scoring with an 11-yard touchdown run, and then Indiana came right down the field, Chip, and made it 7-7. And this was one of those situations where it's frustrating and aggravating because we've seen it in the first few games of the season. The team comes out and they do well on first down, they do well on second down, they have a third and long, they give it up. And Indiana was 4 for 4 on third down on that first drive with Jack Tuttle picking them apart, mostly to Peyton Hendershot, and including the touchdown. The touchdown was on third and goal from, 7 yards out. So I think 3 of the 4 third downs were 7 yards or further to make.
Yeah, it was frustrating. It was kind of, I know, watching the online comments from, various Ohio State fans, it was, kind of almost like a, here we go again kind of feeling with watching the defense that first drive. This is going to seem like a kind of a random, weird question. Do you play chess?
I have not played in quite a while. I would never was a competitive chess player, but I have played it recreationally.
Okay. Well, the reason why I'm going to use kind of a strange analogy here is that, yeah, Indiana drove down the field. They scored the touchdown to Peyton Hendershot, as you referenced, but that hit on Jack Tuttle that knocked him out of the game, I would refer to that as check. Okay, like that was okay. Like, here we go, we've got you. Okay, well, I'll give you the checkmate later on, but that to me was check. It definitely in that first drive. We didn't know it at the time, but it definitely was the beginning of the end. That was the highlight. The highlight was the touchdown, and that was the beginning of the end.
It really was. The weather was a little bit wet and rainy, and Indiana fans were leaving the stadium by halftime of this game. It was 7-7. Jack Tuttle looked good on the opening drive, but Ohio State has, even in recent games against Maryland, for example, has given up something early, figured out what they were doing wrong, adjusted to it, and have been fine the rest of the game defensively. And they were in this game. It was probably made a lot easier by the fact that the more experienced Jack Tuttle, he's only, I think it was only his 4th or 5th start, but he was the most experienced quarterback that was healthy on the team. When he went out, it made things a little easier for Ohio State, but there's no guarantee that even with Jack Tuttle, they would have gotten anything else on the board.
I agree with that. I think, from what I understand, the diagnosis on Jack Tuttle's injury, nobody knows for certain how long he will be out. As I said at the beginning of the podcast, it was unfortunate that Indiana was not at full strength. But I think even if Jack Tuttle had been able to make it throughout the entire game, I just think Ohio State was just way too much for Indiana to be able to keep pace.
Yeah, he was out for a while, then he came back in for a series, and then he was out again. And you hate to see any kid get injured, any young man. I don't want to call them kids and have them be all offended, but to me, they are kids because I'm an old guy. You don't want to see anybody get hurt, and it's an unfortunate side effect of playing the game of football that sometimes you get hurt, and it happens pretty much to everybody. So, though at the time 7-7, Indiana Hoosier fans were happy, thinking, "Hey, we just came right down the field. It's going to be a ball game again, like it has been." And it wasn't, because Ohio State answered before the end of the first quarter. In fact, they answered just a minute and a half later, as Trayveon Henderson went 21 yards for a touchdown. He added another touchdown on a 14-yard reception in the second quarter, and it was 21-7, and then a botched snap on the punt team for Indiana led to a safety. If you would have given me odds on the first score of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s college career, I don't think safety was my bet.
No, it wouldn't be mine either. And earlier I said about check, the safety in the end zone was checkmate. That basically the game was done. The game was done. For all intents and purposes, I know. I mean, it was still in the first half, and I know Ohio State, was able to score, throughout the game. But quite literally, for all intents and purposes, the game was done at that point. I mentioned this to my wife when we were watching the game on Saturday night. What I found, and maybe this is just me being just kind of over analyzing, is you reference the punter fumbling the snap because of the wet conditions, and it didn't seem to really impact Ohio State at all. I mean, like, they're both playing out there in the same conditions, and I thought that was kind of interesting that Indiana was having a difficult time adjusting to the wet conditions, in Ohio State didn't have the same kind of degree of difficulty.
I think sometimes that's where the best athletes are, separated from the next level, is that you have that extra bit of concentration, that extra bit of ability. Jesse Mirko didn't botch any snaps, but there weren't any real high ones for him either, like the one that Indiana's punter dealt with. And you're a little more nervous, maybe punting out of your end zone. So maybe you're not paying as much attention as you need to be. Maybe you're not as focused as you need to be. But that made it 23-7, and they were giving the ball right back. Ohio State wasted no time in scoring again. Chris Olave gets closer and closer to David Boston on a 16-yard pass from C.J. Stroud. And they close out the half with a pair of touchdowns. Trayveon Henderson, a 6-yard run, and Jeremy Ruckert, the first of two touchdown receptions. Year of the tight end back on the table. This one went 14 yards, and it was 44-7 at the half, and you could just hear the disappointment in the announcers' voices as they would not be able to have an exciting, close game and potential upset to call.
Well, after the events of earlier in the day, I'm sure that's probably was what they were hoping for. But obviously, it's one of these things where Ohio State, they came to take care of business. And as I said earlier, I mean, it was done, well before halftime. I mean, it was just pretty much, if Indiana could have asked for a running clock, maybe they should have.
Yeah. The third quarter, again, we talked about C.J. Stroud coming out and starting the second half. They didn't do well to start the second half. I believe they had a penalty in that first drive that hurt them. There were some penalty flags thrown to try to maybe, I don't know, keep the game from getting to 100. I don't know if that was the thought, but they started to see more laundry in the second half. Indiana had a nice long time-consuming drive. They didn't end up getting points on the end of it as a fourth down play was stopped. Ohio State added a touchdown at the end of the third quarter. As I mentioned, Stroud was still in the game through a 2-yard touchdown pass to Jeremy Ruckert, and it was 51-7. And then Noah Ruggles capped the scoring in the fourth quarter and made it 54-7, and that was your final. It was not a close game. The Buckeyes had 31 first downs to just 10 for Indiana. Total offense, Ohio State again over 500, 539, only 128 for Indiana. And when you consider, Chip, that 75 yards came on Indiana's first drive, that's not a lot for the Hoosiers to celebrate after.
No, not at all. And, I felt sorry for, I'm going to probably mispronounce the young man's name, and I don't mean to, Donovan McCulley, the freshman quarterback Indiana inserted in.
That sounds right.
Okay, so he might be carrying the hopes of Indiana football for the remainder of the season. I mean, as I said, nobody knows the severity of Jack Tuttle's injury. Michael Penix is out for the foreseeable future, and I think McCulley might he might have to, basically be running the show from here on
Mm-hmm.
out. So yeah, I mean, Indiana, they certainly did not have the depth or the talent to stick with Ohio State, and I was so pleased, as I know I mentioned it before, but just to reiterate, I was so pleased to see so many backups getting quality time, not just the quarterbacks. I mean, like the backup offensive linemen. Like, I mean, it wasn't. I don't want to say it was extensive, but for example, Trey LaRue. Okay, I saw Trey LaRue actually
Mm-hmm.
playing in a game. I saw Evan Pryor playing well. We talked about Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka. I mean, there was just so many different players. Joe Royer had his first catch. Just so many players contributing. So that to me is always a positive thing when you start thinking about 2022 and beyond. The players who are going to be called upon next year to be contributors.
Yeah. Also, Grant Gremmel was 3 of 4. I mean, only threw for 9 yards, but he's another option that Indiana has. We saw Egbuka. You mentioned him. He ripped off a 42-yard kick return. He is. Everybody in my timeline said, "Oh, he's going to break one this year." I don't know that I agree that he'll break one, but he's going to be exciting and get a lot of long ones. I don't know if he'll score a touchdown, but he seems, yeah, because that's such a crapshoot. You never know. He might get a 99-yarder at some point, but not score. I mean, but he's exciting, and that's something that's been missing from the Ohio State arsenal is those kickoff opportunities, because they haven't been letting guys do it. Now that they are letting someone do it who's very good at it, and they're blocking it pretty well. He's making some moves. But let's quickly just talk about our picks to click. You picked Jeremy Ruckert. He was a co-offensive player of the game, so he clicked 2 touchdowns. You called it. He had he was targeted 5 times. He had 5 catches, 47 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And also, I believe he had a touchdown called back on a lineman downfield.
Yes.
So that could have been 3 for him. I had Garrett Wilson, who had 59 yards. He was the second leading receiver on the team. He didn't score, but I'm going to count that as a click because they rotated guys out pretty early in this game. Jackson Smith and Jigba also had a big day. Very quietly, Trayveon Henderson has 81 yards rushing in this game. I would have maybe guessed 50 yards because it just didn't seem like he had that many touches. He only carried it 9 times.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that they are very, very cautious in their use of Trayveon Henderson. I think that they recognize the talent that they have, and they don't. It's not that I don't want to say that they don't want to overuse him, but they recognize the importance of games such as the upcoming game against Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
The November slate, all these things, and I think they just want to make sure that he's fully healthy, ready to go. I think when the opportunity presents itself, when they need to give him the ball 20 to 25 times, I think he'll respond beautifully.
Yeah. C.J. Stroud was 21 of 28, no interceptions, 4 touchdowns, 266 yards. He was sacked once this week. It looked like a mix-up. Paris Johnson was taking the outside guy for some reason, and then DeJuan Jones blocked inside, and he couldn't get out. I think that was McFadden that made that sack, if I'm not mistaken. But
Could be. I'm not entirely sure.
Checking in on our defensive players, you had Denzel Burke. He must have played well because I don't think he gave up any passes, but he didn't have any stats.
Right.
So,
I know that. I don't know if that's indicative of just his dominance and or indicative of Indiana's poor offensive performance. And I think it's more of the latter. I really do. Nothing against Denzel Burke.
Yeah.
I think, when we talk about the fact that Indiana went through 3 quarterbacks, the aforementioned, passing woes, all of that. I think it was more indicative of Indiana just not being able to get anything going together, with the exception of that first drive that we referenced.
Yeah. All right. I had Zach Harrison, and it finally paid off. He was he was defensive player of the week. He had only 2 tackles. The leading tackler on the team only had 4. So there wasn't a lot of stats to go around because there were such substitutions and such early, putting in backups early in this game. Zach Harrison, 2 tackles. Both of them were tackles for loss. One of them a sack. And he was just generally in the area of the quarterback all night. So I thought he played a good game. I'm going to count that as a click. I'm not going to count Denzel Burke because even if he played well,
No,
you got to at least register some statistic.
I know. I know. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Before we move off this, a player that I know has received a lot of grief. I think some of it fair, some of it, might be misguided. I thought, at one point, Tommy Eichenberg, he had a tackle late in the game.
Crushed a guy.
That was jarring. That was jarring. So, I felt good for him, because he's received a lot of criticism. And I thought that, good for him that he had such a noteworthy play against Indiana.
Yeah, he had 4 tackles, and 2 of them were tackles for loss. So, he made the most of his time. And also Bryson Shaw had 4 tackles. He made the most of his time. He's another guy that's been a little bit, maligned this year. The special teams players of the game were Taraja Mitchell and one Demario McCall. So there you go. And I don't know what's going on. I haven't seen Champions in a couple weeks. Did they stop doing Champions? Am I just not looking
sure.
in the right place, or I don't know?
No, I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. Maybe that will be tomorrow. As we're recording this Monday night, maybe at the Tuesday press conference. I don't know. That's a good question.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about with the Indiana Ohio State game? Big win for Ohio State, and not sure really. I think we've talked plenty about it, quite honestly.
Yeah. No, I think we're ready to move on. Great job by Ohio State, and best of luck to Indiana going forward.
Yeah. All right, Chip. We will give. We've got Penn State next. It's another night game. This one's in the shoe. We will get to our picks to click and our score predictions and talk a little bit more about that matchup later on. But first, we're going to get to our guest. Our guest is going to help us try to make sense of what happened to the Nittany Lions on Saturday, and talk about whether those Nits are going to have anything for the Buckeyes. So let's get to our guest right after this. All right, joining us on the Silver Bullets podcast this week, we are happy to have back on the show with us Matt DeBear. He's the senior editor and founder of RoarLionsRoar.com, and I didn't call him a woodland creature. His name is DeBear, D-E-B-E-A-R. Matt, thanks for coming back with us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You and I can commiserate offline some more about our favorite baseball team changing its name, but for the time being, I apologize, but you're going to have to be alone in your misery with what happened to Penn State on Saturday. I saw only part of the second half and all of the many overtimes, but what happened to Penn State against Illinois? Because that seemed like, even with a freshman quarterback that has never played, that seemed like a winnable game at home.
Yeah, I think it's that's a question we've been asking ourselves for 48 hours or so now. I think it's a number of things. The biggest of which is probably just the overall health of Sean Clifford. You guys saw in the Iowa game what the backup quarterback situation is, and that's a whole other discussion. But Clifford was clearly not 100%. Wasn't running the ball at all, really. The situations where you see him tuck and run previously, he wasn't. He was, anytime he took a hit or you had to make kind of an off schedule throw, just never looked like he was really comfortable. So that explains, I think, a little bit of the offensive side of it, specific to Illinois at least. And on the defensive side of the ball, I think we got a taste of what Penn State's defensive front is without P.J. Mustipher, who is kind of, I think, a bit of an unsung hero. Or was an unsung hero going into the season. I think we saw to a large degree how critical he is, especially in their run defense. And that's, again, that's overly simplifying it, I think, to some degree. But from a simple schematic and on-field perspective, I think those are the two biggest issues. And then you get into things like the the looking ahead to the Ohio State game this weekend, coming off the tough loss at Iowa, obviously a big emotional game. They didn't have the bye week, so it's kind of surprising to see them not ready to play. But it's kind of become a little bit of a theme. If you go back to really James Franklin's first year, their response to losses and their play out of bye weeks. It hasn't been exclusive, but it's just one of those weird quirks that probably is more coincidental than anything. But I think the biggest thing, taking all that into account, is just they just weren't ready to play. I think there were a lot of reasons why that was the case. But it's a team that I think Wisconsin put up 500 yards of offense on and held them to under 100 yards just 2 weeks earlier in Champaign. And I think Penn State didn't get to 250 or much more than that, gave up almost 400 yards rushing. Just, kind of a litany of errors that kind of compounded on themselves and magnified by injury situations and probably a half dozen other things that we don't even know about as, covering the team.
So, Matt, this is Chip. I completely understand how Penn State, they certainly are validated with going with Sean Clifford as what they would believe it gives them the best chance to win. But I guess a question I have is, considering the precarious nature of his health, is James Franklin getting any second guessing whatsoever instead of, hey, coach, you're playing Illinois this week. Why didn't you do more to prepare Roberson? Or did I pronounce the last name right? I hope I am. Okay. Why not? I understand Roberson has his shortcomings, and I'm not taking shots at him, but even as Michael and I, people who have been devotees of trestle ball, that anything that you could do to just a win is a win, with that defense. Is well respected. Why not do more to, rest Clifford, have him ready for the stretch run in November versus, why not play Roberson against Illinois?
Well, I think the simple answer is they don't have a whole lot of trust in Roberson, and that's me speculating. It's not, any inside information or anything like that. But reading between the lines, a lot of the comments, even leading up to the season, and kind of their comfort level with the backup quarterback situation. Will Levis, the guy that backed up Clifford last year, and as you guys might remember, came on in the 2019 game as the backup when Clifford got dinged up there. He's off to Kentucky, having a great season there. And they were not shy. It was a pretty well-known fact that they were scouring the portal over the summer, looking for an option to not only push Clifford, but to I think solidify their comfort level with the guys behind him in the quarterback room. Roberson's in his third year in the program, and there have been whispers all the way up to kind of outright talk of he just hasn't progressed, hasn't developed to the way that they expected him to. And the guy behind him is a true freshman that hasn't played a snap of football since 2019. Missed his high school, did not play in 2020 due to COVID in Maryland. So they went into the season, I think, knowing that they were in a precarious position, and got bit by it. And I think that compounded with Penn State hasn't been able to run the ball at all season. And that's, I think probably the biggest issue is they don't really have any way to take any pressure off whoever is the quarterback. Despite a great stable of running backs, they've never gotten the running game going with any level of consistency this season, which has put more and more pressure on that quarterback position, which I think probably is a big reason why they felt like they needed Clifford, one, to be competitive in the game, but two, I think, he's, they're going to go as he goes this year. And, it's certainly fair to second guess it at this point, just based on the outcome. But you saw in the Iowa game, what Roberson was or wasn't able to do. And despite, by all accounts, him getting quite a bit of reps, both during the bye week and leading up to it, Clifford did not practice a whole lot leading up to the Illinois game. The fact that they went with a guy that was clearly not 100%, but was, by all accounts, healthy enough to play, wasn't at risk of, making an injury worse or anything like that. They felt like that was their best option over what you've seen from Roberson and a true freshman that hasn't played a snap of college football.
So, Matt, what is the prognosis on Clifford one more week away from that injury going up against Ohio State? Clearly, I did see him take a couple of hits, wince, and grab his side and that kind of thing. But if he's not at 100% enough to beat Illinois, they're going to put him out there against Ohio State. Is the thought that he's going to get better? He's got to manage pain. Is this going to be a lingering thing? Does anybody know?
No, anyone that does know isn't talking. That's been Penn State's MO with injuries for quite a while now, is they just don't disclose it unless it's a season-ending deal like you have with PJ Mustipher, for example. I think, without knowing exactly what the injury is, I think the speculation has been that it's been something with his ribs, and as long as it's, not, certain types of rib injuries is my understanding. I'm hardly a doctor. I can barely run a website, but is as long as he can manage the pain, I think that's the biggest deal is his ability to manage whatever that pain is with whatever the injury is. You can certainly say a lot of things about James Franklin. I don't get any sense that he's the type of guy, or the Penn State program is the type of program that's going to push a guy to play when they're either at risk of making something worse or not healthy enough to play. So if it is a rib injury, and like I said, that's kind of been the speculation just based on how he got hit against Iowa, some of the things he was and wasn't able to do on the sideline of that game. The general thought is a rib injury for a quarterback, just a pain management thing, unless it's a certain type of injury. So that's really where it's at as far as we can tell. We won't really know how much he practices this week. There's only a 15 or 20 minute open practice session on Wednesdays, which we saw him take part in last week, but everyone around the program and even Franklin after the game mentioned that he was one of several guys that weren't able to really fully practice during the week leading up to the Illinois game.
So I know that your team is more than Sean Clifford, so I want to switch over to the other side of the ball, and I want to talk about a linebacker who looks very impressive, Brandon Smith. Can you kind of give our listeners an idea in terms of what kind of player that you have there?
Yeah, he's, checks all the boxes you're looking for as an outside linebacker. I think he kind of got thrown to the fire a little bit earlier than they anticipated last year with Micah Parsons opting out. He kind of got put in a weird position, I think, where they probably were playing him in more situations than he was really ready for. But he's continued to improve really, every season now. He's in his third year. Probably at his best as a blitzer. He had a big play on Saturday, forcing a fumble. But he's, like I said, checks all the boxes, runs really well. I think probably sometimes is overly reliant on his athleticism, like a lot of young linebackers can be. But he's a guy they're certainly pleased with, and I think is going to have to take on a bigger role, especially against Ohio State, where they're going to throw a lot of different things at you. They're, have a level of athleticism across the field that is really unmatched within the Big Ten. So they're going to rely on him, I think, in a lot more situations. And he's stepped up to the plate this year. I don't think he's a finished product quite yet, but he certainly has all the ability to. It's just a matter of getting better every week and better understanding what his role is within the defense.
Matt, you guys have your sort of your finger on the pulse of the program. You've got your sources. This is a difficult question for anybody to answer who's not directly inside, but with the rumblings that we've heard out of Los Angeles, could that be affecting Penn State this year in terms of maybe a focus thing, or obviously there's been talk about James Franklin to USC. I don't know how much truth there is to any of this stuff. It's all kind of rumor at this point, but is that the kind of thing that could sort of snowball after a game like the Iowa game?
Oh, I think it's without a doubt. That you can do your best. Any program in the country, is going to do their best to try and insulate that sort of thing. Franklin said at this point, as you guys know, his name's come up for jobs that are and aren't open basically every season for the last 3 or 4 years since Penn State started to have success with him. And he said earlier in the year after Helton was fired at USC that at this point he wasn't really going to discuss it publicly. He was going to talk with his players and the people around the program about it, deal with it that way, and that would be it. But I think it's foolish. You've got a bunch of 18 to 22 or 23-year-old kids that they read Twitter, they get text messages from their buddies. It's I think would be naive to think that doesn't have some sort of impact. Mm-hmm. The reality of where he actually is with that is, like you said, is anyone's guess. His name has been linked to USC and LSU both this year. Florida State and Florida in previous years, USC before it's open. So I think they've done as good a job as you can during the season to deal with that. But like I said, you've kind of got a bunch of kids that can't help but be in the know on that sort of thing, and they see it, and it surely has an impact. Whether it is the reason why they've struggled the last 7 quarters, I think it's probably playing a part, but I don't think it's a major reason. Now where it goes from here with the playoff chances all but eliminated, chances of winning the Big Ten really all but gone. I think it'll be very interesting to see where they go from here. And if the talk gets louder, where it goes as the season progresses here in the last 5 games.
So I'm going to stick with the defensive side of the ball. And considering Ohio State has an arsenal of wide receivers that would be difficult for just about any team to effectively defend against. Can you give our listeners some idea in terms of how you think the Penn State secondary, how they're going to strategically match up against Ohio State's wide receivers?
Well, I think they are, from my perspective, probably the best secondary that Ohio State's faced this year. Joey Porter Jr. and Tariq Castro-Fields, I think, are as good a cover cornerback duo as there is in the Big Ten. But they're going to be tested like they haven't been yet this year with the arsenal of weapons that Ohio State has out wide. I think Jaquan Brisker at safety, his improvement from last year to this year, I think, has been a big reason why Penn State's defense as a whole has really played back to the level I think that they really have for a number of years after taking a step back last year. I think what's really going to push Penn State, though, is not to sidestep the question to some degree, but I think from watching Ohio State, when I watch them, I think one thing that gets overlooked is how good they are up front. And you saw on Saturday, Penn State really is struggling to stop the run now with the injuries they have up front. And so I think what Ohio State's going to be able to take advantage of if things break, the way I think both of us or all three of us anticipate is Trayvon Henderson in the Ohio State running game. I think forcing Penn State to devote more of those secondary resources, if you will, towards stopping the run, which I think is going to open up the downfield passing game for guys like Olave and Smith and Jigba. And I could go on and on. I know I'm forgetting a couple guys.
Well, before we let you go, I had a couple of things that I wanted to ask you about. First of all, I wanted to ask you about that overtime game because it was crazy. And I mean, I know there are not a lot of offensive coordinators who can design a play to get 3 yards, but what was that? I mean, I've never seen 2 teams ever have that much trouble going 3 yards anywhere on the field ever. I mean, you just had to be. I don't know what you were doing during this. As an impartial observer, I have not laughed that hard in probably 10 years.
Well, I started laughing at some point, I think, during the fourth quarter. It kind of got to be that point where you're past frustration and anger and more intense emotions, and you just kind of have to laugh at it. As far as I was concerned, from Penn State's perspective, I think it was just an extension of the offensive issues they had all day. They have no ability to run the ball with any real consistency, and I think that allowed in Illinois to really play off the ball and force Penn State to find a hole. When they did, it was lack of execution. There was the underthrown / drop pass to Clifford on the throwback play. There was at least, I think, 2 drops in the end zone by Penn State. I know Illinois had a couple. I think it was just, a team in Penn State that had struggled to execute really at that point for almost 2 full games offensively, whether it was 3 yards or 30 yards, and a team like Illinois that I think almost felt like to me was all kind of outsmarting themselves. They've been able to run the ball pretty much at will all day,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of that trying to what's Penn State going to think we're going to do when we're going to do the opposite of that, and it just kind of snowballed. But like I said, I think it was just two very inefficient, struggling offenses, kind of put on display in the worst possible way.
Yeah,
I've heard
sure.
people. I was going to say I've heard people say with the new overtime rules that you almost want to encourage your offensive linemen to false start, so that way you're moved back versus the on the 3. You know what I mean? Because it gives you a little bit more offensive flexibility. It's just I'm not a. I understand why the new rules were implemented, but personally, I like the old playoff system that they had. I thought.
Yeah, I think it was an overreaction to a problem that didn't really exist. There had been the odd game every few years that went 6 or 7 overtimes, but your classic answer to a problem that wasn't really there. No, I think there was at least one, maybe two. I guess it was just the one where both teams happened to score, so a chance to end the game there, and you don't. I think it's the forcing the 2-point conversion as early as they do, and then going exclusively to it, just from a big picture perspective, I think is going to increase at least the length of games, if not the number of plays, which I know was the ultimate goal.
I thought it would have the opposite result. I thought that it would be hard to get the stop, not hard to get the actual 3 yards.
Well, I'm not sure we had the two best examples or two best teams to put that to the test on Saturday.
That's true. Matt, before we let you go, you've been great, and we appreciate your insight into the Penn State program. Can you? We always put our guests on the spot and ask them to pick the key matchup in the game that's going to decide things, and also to provide a score prediction. So you're up. You're in the spotlight.
Well, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier. I think it's probably under the radar from a national perspective or when you first look at the game. But I think it's Ohio State's offensive line against Penn State's defensive line, and Penn State's down to, I think I told someone earlier today, their 3rd, 5th, and 6th defensive tackles due to injury or otherwise this year. And I think what's really opened up Ohio State's offense has been the emergence of a true big-time running game with Trayvon Henderson primarily, who was a guy, incidentally, that I loved out of high school. I had a couple of people tell me he's the best running back prospect that they've seen in a number of years. And that includes guys that watched Saquon Barkley in high school. So, and I think that's really where Ohio State's going to, whether it's right away or over the course of 4 quarters, they're really going to control the game, is with, that really dominant offensive line against the banged-up Penn State defensive line, that running game is ultimately going to open up the passing game for C.J. Stroud and that arsenal of wide receivers that they've got. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see Penn State hang around for a couple quarters. That's kind of been their MO with James Franklin. There's been some big score lines at the end of the game, but they've seldom been outclassed from start to finish, especially since things have kind of gotten back to a full roster and everything for the Lions. But I haven't really thought of a specific score, but since I'm on the spot here, I'll say something like 38-14, something like that. I think it might, like I said, stay close for a quarter or two, but just Ohio State's depth and really that strength on the lines, especially offensive or Ohio State offense versus Penn State defense, I think ultimately is too much for Penn State.
Matt DeBear, the senior editor and founder of RoarLionsRoar.com. Other than the website that I just gave, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, I'm on Twitter myself at PSUMatt2005. We've got our own podcast. It's up on SoundCloud and iTunes and all those things. If anyone is glutton for punishment and wants to relive the Penn State Illinois game in podcast recap form, and we'll have our preview of the game later on in the week. Check out RoarLionsRoar.com. The website's on Twitter at RLRblog. And then, like I said, I'm on there myself at PSUMatt2005. And will be trying to prepare myself for what's coming on Saturday. I think no one that I know in the Nittany Nation is terribly confident heading into Columbus this week. Certainly not where we felt a couple weeks ago before the Iowa game and the injuries took over.
Well, I can't imagine there are too many more dangerous animals than a wounded Nittany lion, Matt. So we'll have to see what happens. If this year has taught us anything, it's that there are no sure things in college football. Maybe Georgia, but nothing else has looked anywhere near a sure thing this year. So we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate your insight, and we especially appreciate the fact that you are able to talk about this after what we all witnessed on Saturday. So thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. I appreciate you guys having me. Enjoy the game.
You too.
All right, thanks again to our guest Matt DeBear from RoarLionsRoar.com. That was it was good insight from him, and he was a good sport to come on and talk about his team after a game that I'm sure, even with an injured Sean Clifford, he did not expect them to have trouble with the fighting Burts of Illinois.
No, he didn't, and I appreciate the fact that he was as objective as you can be about the end results for Penn State and diagnosing a lot of the problems that Penn State is having this season.
Yeah. All right, well, why don't we talk about this game? Why don't we start with that, our walk around the Big Ten? We'll start with Illinois and Penn State. That game ended after 9 overtimes. This is not a false score here. 20-18 is the final because of the new overtime rules. You've got field goals are on the board and only for the first couple overtimes, and then after that, it's no more possessions. It's just a 2-point try for each team until one team makes one and the other team does not. So it goes 9 overtimes. I heard somebody on the broadcast say something to the effect of it's the longest game in college football history, and I'm like, no, it isn't. It's been a very short game with all the rushing and lack of incomplete passes, and this might be the 9th overtime, might be the most overtimes, but it's certainly not the longest game.
I agree with you. I think it was longest based on, I guess you could say by the 9 overtimes, but certainly not in terms of the length of minutes of the game.
Yeah.
That would be completely inaccurate.
Yeah. So you touched on this a little bit in our discussion with Matt about the, what you thought of the overtime rules, the new overtime rules. I don't like them. It seems like a lot of people found it compelling, but they would stop short of saying they liked it. And I think that's because we're just hardwired into this thought of what football is, and what football is not is sort of a one-play, winner-take-all kind of situation. It's you need a way to solve overtime. The NFL has their ways, and that's not a perfect system. I don't know that there's such a thing as a perfect system. College football has had occasionally, very rarely, an exceedingly lengthy game because the overtimes, either both teams score or neither team scores or both kick field goals or whatever. So they've created this new thing that nobody asked for in the name of quote-unquote player safety. So that they're not out there just playing down after down after down. I have a proposal. I don't know if anybody else has come up with this. It's probable because it's not like revolutionary or anything, Chip, but I want to run my idea for a college football overtime by you and see what you think of this. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so the ball is placed at the 10-yard line, not the 25. You've got 4 downs to make a touchdown. There are no field goals, and you have to go for 2 if you make it. I think this accomplishes the same thing as what they're trying to accomplish and cuts down on the chances that we have as many overtimes as before. And even if we do have the occasional game with that many overtimes, it's still less wear and tear on the players. It's fewer plays.
Okay. All right, so you have to go for a touchdown. You have to go for a touchdown, no field goals, and you have to go for 2. So, would you? I'm just asking. I'm just trying to think this out. So let's extrapolate this to what the carnage that we just witnessed on Saturday. Like against Illinois and Penn State. So in other words, let's just say that in the first possession that Illinois, they scored a touchdown, and they didn't get the 2-point conversion, but they were up. In this case, it would have been 16-10. Yeah. So in your situation, if Penn State doesn't score a touchdown, it's just game over. It doesn't matter that Illinois didn't that Illinois didn't get that 2-point conversion, right? I mean, it would be
right.
Okay.
If Illinois got the touchdown but missed the 2-point conversion, then Penn State would have 4 downs to get the touchdown. And if they get the touchdown, they then also have to go for 2. And then if they didn't get the 2-point conversion, they would then have to play another overtime. But again, you're only going 10 yards. You're not going 25. You're not asking quite as much of the players. And I also think that this is a situation where a team might be desperate and you might see 10-yard Hail Marys.
Oh, yeah, easily. I think, I definitely think, because it's one of these things where when you start thinking about a 2-point conversion, the average team, they don't have, just play after play after play of 2-point conversions. You know what I mean? Like they only have so many of those. So then when it comes to, and that was kind of when I was watching it on Saturday afternoon with Illinois, the commentators were kind of, and Matt kind of alluded to it, that they were skeptical as to what is Illinois' strategy here when they'd been successful all game long running the ball.
Yeah.
It certainly seemed a lot more plausible that they could run for a touchdown, or a 2-point conversion. And now you got me thinking about it. Running for a 2-point conversion versus trying to do any kind of, unique formations or trick plays or whatever. So I think that certainly has merit compared to what we saw on Saturday.
Yeah, I just don't know that I've seen 2 bigger failures on double reverse pass backs to the quarterback than I saw in one game than I saw in that overtime alone on Saturday. It was comical. Like Matt alluded to, it's like Illinois is trying to outsmart themselves. You're at the 3-yard line. You've had almost no trouble all day at picking up 3 yards. Why not just run the football?
Right. I agree. And if anything, Matt also alluded to this, that attempted pass to Sean Clifford, it did kind of, I know the pass was underthrown, but it did kind of also illustrate that Sean Clifford's not 100%. I mean, he didn't look good, trying to reach for that ball. So, I know we're gonna get into our predictions here in a little bit, but that's why that kind of sparked that whole question about Roberson, because to me, strategically, I would have swallowed my pride if I was James Franklin last week. I would have done whatever it took to get Roberson comfortable, rest Sean Clifford, because any kind of idea about getting him healthy for the stretch run. Besides Ohio State, they still have to play Michigan. They still have to play Michigan State. Mm-hmm. So, you want to be a factor in the Big Ten East. Clifford's going to give you that, and that's why I was surprised that he was even out there against Illinois.
Yeah. No disrespect to Illinois, but this was the same situation Ohio State had with Akron. It's like, we need to get our starter healthy. We're not going to put him out here against Akron. We're going to give him a week off. We're going to give the other guys reps, and they're going to play in that game. And you're right. That's exactly what James Franklin should have done, and I'm not sure why he didn't do it, other than if those guys are that bad that he doesn't trust them over a clearly wounded Sean Clifford. Then I don't know what to say. I mean, maybe you take your best wide receiver and you run the Wildcat all day or something. But that was not great, and that was a huge loss for Penn State. It's interesting that throwback to Clifford. Obviously, you're going for the element of surprise there because they don't expect that play when Clifford has clearly been struggling all day. But you're right; it did illustrate just how banged up he is, because it was underthrown, but it wasn't awful. I mean, he could have, had he been more mobile, maybe been able to stop and catch it and then run it in. But yeah, that's not necessarily a play I think I would have run for my injured quarterback anyway, because I wouldn't want him to take that extra hit.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm going to be curious as to see what the end result is going to be against an Ohio State pass rush. And credit to Illinois. I mean, they played well. They were able to do what they needed. I mean, took them 9 overtimes, but they, especially a week after Brett Bielema was on camera disparaging his roster and the poor recruiting that he inherited, that his players responded, and they defeated a more talented team on the road. So I think this gives Illinois something to build upon. And like I said, I think it kind of sparks many more questions about just the depth that Penn State has at quarterback behind Sean Clifford, and what might happen if Sean Clifford sustains further injury.
And I think it also said a lot that Chase Brown had 223 yards rushing, and they had 2 running backs over 100 yards. I think it says a lot about the depth of Penn State's defensive line.
Oh, yeah. That's definitely, as I said a moment ago, has to be a flashing red light of warning going into November, when I'm taking Ohio State out of the equation. When teams such as Michigan and Michigan State are still remaining on the schedule, that have made no secret whatsoever about wanting to run the ball, I think something has to be done to shore up that defensive front for Penn State.
Yeah, it sure does. And, I would have thought that the backups, even the backups to the backups at Penn State, when getting practice reps, should be able to handle a bad Illinois team. But obviously I was not right. I was incorrect. I mean, Sean Clifford is still the top passer in that game. 165 yards that's not a lot of yards, and 19 of 34 is not great. So that tells you a lot about that game. And that was the only close game in the Big Ten this weekend. The others were pretty much handled. I mean, Northwestern kind of struggled a little bit, or Michigan struggled a little bit with Northwestern for a little while. It was no score at the end of the first quarter and 10-7 at halftime. But I haven't watched a lot of Northwestern, Chip, but their quarterback play was terrible in this game.
Oh, it's terrible, but that actually speaks volumes about what they have at the position, because Ryan Olinsky is the best that they have.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being completely serious.
Yeah,
I mean,
I know you are.
They've turned everywhere to, try and figure out, all right, well, who's going to start this week? And, and Ryan Olinsky, again, is one of these, he transferred, I believe, from South Carolina into Northwestern, and they considered him their best option, and that's what you got. That's what I mean. Now, I just think, they're just offensively, they've been challenged for a while. Like they were beneficiaries of Peyton Ramsey last year as a transfer portal quarterback. Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll have to do something like that in the offseason this year.
Yeah, Ryan Olinsky was only 14 of 29 for 114 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. But I mean, he had guys open that he couldn't hit. He was nowhere close on a number of passes. He was making reads that made you wonder what he was seeing out there. My takeaway from that game is this is a quarterback who is not a Big Ten caliber quarterback, and he played like it. Evan Hull had one just amazing 75-yard run out of nowhere, and his other 5 carries went for 6 yards. It was not a team that was able to run on Michigan, and the quarterback was not going to make any plays.
Yeah, I mean, Northwestern is woeful on the offensive side of the ball, and I'm starting to actually have questions about Michigan. I know, yeah, they're undefeated, but I think this coming weekend, is going to speak volumes not only about Michigan but Michigan State. I mean, I realize someone will be winning that game. I'm not, but I'm just kind of curious. I know we'll talk about Michigan State here in a minute. We talked about how easily Ohio State handled Indiana. Now, granted, that was with Tuttle being healthy, unlike when he played against Michigan State. But Michigan State only beat Indiana 20-15.
Yeah,
they did not look dominant. So it's going to be interesting to see. The Wolverines obviously love to run the ball. They're very effective at it, but their passing game is not. They really don't have much of a downfield passing game. So I think it's going to really be interesting to see how this game shapes up. I'm taking the Spartans for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a game where Michigan had a couple guys go over 100 yards rushing. I thought this was a very un-Pat Fitzgerald-like defensive performance in that nobody on Northwestern who hit the running back first made the tackle. It was always bouncing off the first tackle, maybe bouncing off the second and third tackle and getting 6 yards where he should have gotten tackled at the line of scrimmage. And credit to Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins for running hard and being difficult to bring down, but you don't normally see Pat Fitzgerald defenders hitting guys in the hole and not making the play.
I could see having difficulty bringing down Haskins because I think he's a load. Mm-hmm. Nothing against Blake Corum. I think he's more of the lightning to Haskins' thunder. But like I said, I think this is just with the retirement of their defensive coordinator, the aforementioned offensive issues. It's just going to be a long year in Evanston.
Yeah. So Wildcats dropped to 3-4 overall, 1-3 in the conference. Michigan 7-0, 4-0 in the conference. And not to contradict you, you said we would talk more about Michigan State, but Michigan State did not play this week. We can go through the schedule, but
I just meant in terms of previewing, but that's fine.
Wisconsin went to Purdue. Purdue flush off of that big win against Iowa, and Purdue remembered that, hey, we're Purdue.
I really did how well they played against Iowa. And you have to admit, Wisconsin offensively has not been setting the world on fire. Mm-hmm. That I really thought, okay, this is the year for Purdue, and obviously terribly mistaken. The Wisconsin defense is what's carrying that team. I mean, like they certainly capitalized on making things miserable for Purdue. Mm-hmm. I don't think Graham Mertz is really going to turn it around this year. I think that they're starting to realize they need to rely on their traditional running game, and I think Braylon Allen is giving them a spark that maybe they didn't realize that they needed at the beginning of the season. Mm-hmm. So Wisconsin's playing better, and Purdue, we'll see where they go after what was a dominant performance by the Badgers.
Yeah, like Illinois and like Michigan, Wisconsin had 2 100-yard rushers. Braylon Allen had 140, and Malusi had 149, and between the two of them, they had 3 touchdowns. This was not a game where Graham Mertz was asked to do much of anything. He only threw 8 passes and completed 5 of them, no touchdowns, no interceptions, though, so that's a step in the right direction for him. This was just all about Purdue not being able to stop the run, and that's just plain and simple what it was. And it was also Aiden O'Connell being very loose with the ball. He threw 3 interceptions in this game.
Yes. Like I said, Wisconsin will make you pay if you're not careful with the. I mean, they have that that kind of similar. I don't want to say mindset, but similar style of play to Iowa.
Right.
That they capitalize on your mistakes and make you pay for them.
Yeah. So Purdue, we thought that win over Iowa was pretty comprehensive. You and I thought, well, maybe Purdue is improved to the point where now all of a sudden they're actually in the driver's seat in the Big Ten West, and that train left the station in a hurry. So there's a little bit of a logjam in the West. This puts Iowa back in play to win the West. Purdue is 2-2, Wisconsin's 2-2, and both teams are 4-3 overall. So neither team will be ranked this week, I would imagine, unless Wisconsin gathers enough points to maybe sneak back into 25. But probably not worth ranking either of those teams at this point. Wisconsin is very one-dimensional. They'll go to Minnesota. Maryland, their free fall continues. They lose 34-16 against the Gophers. And maybe the Gophers now and Iowa, those are the teams that you have to watch out for to get out of the West. As Minnesota looks like they finally got things figured out. They're 5-2 overall, 3-1 in the Big Ten. They handled Talia Tagovailoa. He only completed 17 of 27 for 189 yards and a touchdown. And they're running the football even though they keep losing running backs. Kai Thomas with 139 yards, Marquise Irving with 105 yards. Chip, another Big Ten team with multiple 100-yard rushers, and yet what's going on at Ohio State? They can't even get one 100-yard rusher against Indiana.
Right. Well, I think it's more reflective of Ryan Day, like I said, wanting to keep everybody involved and keep everybody healthy. I know that Master Teague was unavailable, and we already
Marcus
talked
Crowley
about
too.
Marcus Crowley, Trayvon Henderson. I think they want to just be precautionary, and I think Mayan Williams. I think he was a little dinged up, and that's when they said, "Hey, why don't we get Evan Pryor some more reps?" So, I think we shall see the stronger concentration on the running game as we get closer and closer into November. That's just my personal belief.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the way the week is shaping up then, Chip. Of course, we talked about Michigan State. That's in East Lansing. And a pair of 7-0 teams, a pair of 4-0 in the Big Ten teams. You like the Spartans in this one. I don't know what to expect because I didn't think Michigan State was a bad team, but they really didn't play very well against Indiana at all. And I don't know if they were exposed or if they just weren't up for the game or it was just a good game plan for Indiana. I'm not sure what the problem was, but they didn't really get Kenneth Walker the third going. Peyton Thorne didn't have a very good game. Didn't get Jaden Reed involved. It was not a great game for the Spartans in any stretch, even though they pulled it out. Michigan looks vulnerable, but they just do enough to win every week. They're kind of, I wouldn't call them the Big Ten's Oklahoma at this point because Oklahoma's squeaking by even tighter games than Michigan. Michigan's not necessarily squeaking by each week. They're winning handily from time to time. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting matchup. Of course, it'll be one worth watching. That's the big noon game on Fox. The Iowa Hawkeyes also play at noon at Wisconsin in a game that you and I probably would have said that's for the Big Ten West at the beginning of this season.
I think I probably did say that.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, even though Wisconsin is, their defense is playing better. I mean, as you mentioned, I just think the lack of an effective passing game, I think that's going to make the difference. Even though Iowa's going on the road into what promises to be a very challenging environment at Camp Randall, I think Iowa will. Not that Iowa's an offensive juggernaut themselves. I think Iowa will have enough to pull out the win against Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin will probably be feeling a little confidence after winning at Purdue, but Chip, Iowa's had 2 weeks to think about this Purdue thing.
Right.
They are not going to be sitting back in any way, shape, or form. They are going to be wanting to get out and get going. They're going to be extremely fired up. So this is going to be a 2-screen weekend because those 2 games right there are both going to be worth watching. A game that's probably not worth watching is Rutgers at Illinois, also at noon. And it's a chance for Burt to have a winning streak.
It is a chance, and Rutgers is kind of in a free fall. It seems as though ever since Ohio State went out there and dismantled them, the high point of, hey, we almost upset Michigan
on the road,
and feeling good. And, when we had our podcast, the Rutgers fans, they know that this is if there ever is going to be a year to catch Ohio State, well, that quickly faded, and it just seems as though ever since then, Rutgers, they not only lost to Ohio State, they lost to Northwestern. They're just, like I said, they're not doing well ever since Ohio State basically thumped them.
Yeah, Rutgers had the ball late with a chance to go and beat Michigan in the Big House, and then Ohio State basically treated Rutgers like the 12-year-old who's trying to graduate at Thanksgiving from the card table with the other kids to the adult table. And no, the Ohio State sent them back to the card table, and they're sulking, and they've been just wallowing in their own misery for 3 weeks now. And this is a game I would have had Rutgers winning at the beginning of the season, even on the road, but now I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think this might be, as I said earlier when we were talking about Illinois and Penn State, Illinois, this is an opportunity for them to build upon that. Now, again, it was really ugly, but, a win on the road, to be able to come home and, like you said, have a small winning streak granted against Rutgers.
Yeah. The other noon game, Indiana will go to Maryland. Maryland has also been in free fall of late, and Indiana, we've talked about their problems. So somebody's going to be happy at the end of this game, but probably nobody who watches it on TV.
Yeah, my gut instinct right now is to go with Maryland, simply because, yeah, they've been in free fall, but we just saw what they may have to do against Maryland. They might have to try out a true freshman quarterback who, I'm not saying he may not develop into a strong player, but I just think on the road at Maryland, I think the Terrapins they'll get a win somehow.
Yeah, you don't just walk into College Park and come out with a W as a freshman. I don't know what's going to happen in this game. I would think that in a game like this between these two teams, both kind of down, I think it's more likely for Maryland to get well than Indiana in this game because they're at home. They have probably the single most talented player on either side that's healthy, and that's Talia Tagovailoa, or at least I assume he is. I didn't actually see the end of that game this weekend, but I would expect Maryland to win this game. Let's move on to 3:30, Chip, and there's a couple of games at 3:30. Minnesota is going to Northwestern. I'm going to put it out there now. Put your money on Minnesota.
Oh, easily. And I'm starting to think that Minnesota, the fact that, Tanner Morgan, you never know what you're going to get, but he's actually, as you said, Minnesota seems to have a uncanny ability of uncovering running backs capable of running for over 100 yards. And now the passing game with Tanner Morgan is starting to click. So I think Minnesota, we might, if Ohio State continues on their winning ways, we might get a rematch against the Golden Gophers in Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship.
That's quite possible. And Chip, did I hear you just admit that your mama said that Tanner Morgan is like a box of chocolates?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Never know what you're going to get. The other 3:30 game, Chip, Purdue at Nebraska, and it's the perennial, can Nebraska finally win? I'm going to say Purdue wins by one score because that's basically what happens to Nebraska every week.
I'll go with that. I mean, it's okay. How many more ways can we? It is. We're actually close to Halloween. How many more? Their trick or treat. I think how many more tricks can be pulled upon Nebraska?
Yeah, And then, of course, the marquee game in the Big Ten, we thought. Maybe it won't be. Maybe it won't even be the best game of the day. Penn State visits the Horseshoe in Columbus. Number 20 Penn State after consecutive losses. They're 5-2, 2-2 in the Big Ten after losing at Iowa and at home to Illinois. I never would have thought that I would have uttered those words this season. And Ohio State at 6-1, 4-0 in the Big Ten. The offense is rolling for Ohio State. Defense, say it every week. Better competition, better competition, better competition. But it's just Akron. It's just Rutgers. It's just Maryland. It's just Indiana. Penn State, even if Ohio State shuts Penn State down, we're going to say it's just Penn State without Sean Clifford.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I said at the very beginning. It was unfortunate that Indiana wasn't at full strength. I mean, even more so for Penn State, because this was certainly looming as one of the more difficult games on Ohio State's 2021 schedule when we were looking at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, so the Buckeyes and Penn State, let's take a walk through the numbers. And of course, much of this is predicated on a healthy Sean Clifford, but Penn State's their offensive numbers also just don't look like Penn State's offensive numbers. And again, a lot of that is they did nothing against Illinois. They did very little against Iowa. But Penn State scoring offense, Chip, 79th in the country. That's exceedingly low for a Penn State team. 26.9 points per game. Here's a number I never would have thought I would hear in regards to Penn State. Penn State football. Rushing offense in the country. Penn State is ranked 100th in the country in rushing, and they are gaining only 119.7 yards per game. Chip, did you ever think that you would live long enough to see a Penn State offense, a rushing offense for Penn State that was 100th in the country?
No, not at all. Because one of the players on that Penn State roster, and I know that you and I don't really follow the recruiting extensively, but Noah Cain, one of Penn State's starting running backs. Mm-hmm. Ohio State wanted him very, very badly, and he is not doing well. I think it's more of a function of the Penn State offensive line, struggles. Mm-hmm. But even so, I mean, to your point about where Penn State's ranked in terms of the rushing capabilities, no, I never would have expected this.
And if you've got a Sean Clifford in there who's not 100% and is not running the football, that hinders what that offense does even more in terms of running the football. The passing offense has been better, 47th in the country, 253.6 yards per game. This is a team that's got Jahan Dotson. You may remember what he did to Sean Wade. Very talented player. And total offense, Penn State 84th in the country, 373.3 yards per game. That is that's going to be music to Kerry Combs and Matt Barnes' ears.
Oh, absolutely. And I just think I'm sure that they are preparing for Sean Clifford, but I would be thinking that Matt Barnes and Kerry Combs are thinking, hey, they're going to have some flexibility on blitzing because they know that they're more than likely going up against a not 100% Sean Clifford.
Right. Yeah. So what you want to do is keep them in third and longs and keep attacking. But to your point too, there's really not that much reason to take too many chances if with the way Penn State's offense has been this year. Maybe you send a fifth guy, but I wouldn't clear out the middle and let Dotson run a slant and then take it to the house. I would just be.
Absolutely. Right. Yep.
Penn State defensively has been, pretty good. Their scoring defense is 6th in the country, Chip, 14.7 points per game. Where they've struggled in that, they've struggled mostly recently is the rushing defense, and that's 61st in the country. They're allowing 146 yards per game. 146 points per game would be even worse. The pass defense, as Matt mentioned, has been strong. 15th in the country, 178 yards per game allowed. I still expect Ohio State to. I expect C.J. Stroud to throw over 250 yards this week. Total defense, Penn State is ranked 26th, 324.4 yards per game. Where I think Penn State can have some success defensively is getting to the quarterback, and it'll be up to C.J. Stroud this week to protect the football, not fumble it if he's sacked, not put the ball in harm's way if he's under pressure throwing it. We will see a little bit more of how mature C.J. Stroud is as a passer this week, I think.
Yeah, and I think to that point about his maturity, making sure that he knows, when pressure comes, to get rid of the ball, regardless of whether it's to an outlet receiver, scrambling, which he has shown an aversion to. And I'm not, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, well, run. I'm not the one being chased by 300-pound defensive linemen and, that could inflict substantial injury. So we'll see. I agree with you. I think Penn State defensively is going to dial up some things to try and confuse C.J. Stroud, and we'll see how C.J. Stroud responds.
Yeah, I think C.J. Stroud's aversion to running, as you put it, I think may have been linked to his injury. He did have a pretty successful scramble or two against Indiana, as I recall.
Right. He did.
Anyway, let us get to this week. The Penn State Nittany Lions. We've talked about them. We've had Matt talk about them on this show, our guest, and I'm not going to write Penn State off based on the Illinois game because, as I mentioned, this has been a season where we've seen there isn't really a team that's above laying an egg. There's not a team that's above getting upset, with the possible exception of Georgia, just because it hasn't happened yet. This is not a team that, again, it's a wounded animal. It's a cornered animal. It's an animal that's going to be fired up. James Franklin is going to have his team ready to play, but I think especially defensively, Ohio State's going to have to weather some storms in the first half, and I think that they can pull away in the second half, but it may be a close halftime score. And, that's where my head is at. What are you thinking?
No, I agree with you. I think Penn State always gets up for playing Ohio State. I know Sean Clifford more than likely is not going to be at 100%, so that's going to, I think, impact this game. But I think the Penn State defense is tenacious enough, and as we just said, I think that the Penn State defensive staff is going to try to present some looks to C.J. Stroud that he hasn't seen yet, to try to not only confuse but potentially create turnovers. So we'll just have to see. I agree with you. I think Penn State is tough enough and scrappy enough to stick around for at least the first half, but I think Ohio State just has too much depth and speed, and they're going to start to pull away in the second half.
Yeah. All right, it's time to make our picks to click. Chip, last week we started on the offensive side of the ball, so you're going to get us started with the defensive side of the ball this week. Who is your defensive Ohio State Buckeyes pick to click?
Well, I know that I've picked him before, and I think this game just kind of spells out Ronnie Hickman to me. It's just something about, him being all over the field, at that bullet position. I know that Penn State has struggled running the ball, but I just think Ronnie Hickman's going to be disruptive, all over the field for the Buckeyes on defense.
Yeah, that's a good pick, and someone that I had in mind as well. I think that Penn State's going to have to throw the football. I think they've struggled to run the football, but they're not going to. I don't think that Clifford is going to be running and taking off. So I think this is a type of game that will sort of lends itself, I think, to safeties and linebackers. So I'm going to take Steel Chambers in this game.
Like it. I thought about Steel Chambers as well.
Yeah. So that will put us on the offensive side of the football, and I think that after a quiet week, we're going to see a reemergence. Even though he got in the end zone this past weekend, didn't have a big game. I say we're going back to the Olave Garden for all-you-can-eat breadsticks, salad, and soup. I'm taking Chris Olave.
Okay. Well, I've hinted at it throughout the podcast about how as it gets closer and closer to November, about Ohio State being more committed to the running game.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go with Trayvon Henderson. I think in some way, shape, or form, I think this is the kind of game that he not only is going to go over 100 yards rushing. I think in some way, shape, or form, it may not be 20 carries, but I think he's going to touch the ball at least 20 times.
Mm-hmm. See, you're taking the free space in bingo.
I am.
All right. Hey, it's all good. That brings us to the final bit of business today, and that's to give our score predictions. What's going to happen when Penn State visits the Shoe on Saturday night, Chip? Where is your head in terms of a final score?
I like Matt's prediction. I'm going to be somewhat comparable. I'm going to say Ohio State 42, and I'll just say Penn State 17.
Okay. That's pretty good. I think again we're you and I are usually pretty close on our predictions, and I think that, like Matt said, Matt is what Matt had said 38 to what did he say 38 to 24, 38
no,
to 21,
I thought it was
20.
I thought he said 38-17.
Maybe he said 17. I don't remember. You expect me to remember something that happened 20 minutes ago? Yeah. So I think Ohio State's offense is better than that. And I like the 42. So I'm going to keep the 42. I'm going to reject the 17 and say 13.
Okay.
So if it's going to be, one of us is going to win this week, Chip, because we've got the same score for Ohio State. So it just matters who's closer to Penn State's score. Now, if Penn State goes out and wins 30-0, then we both lose.
Yeah, there you go. And we're both sad.
Yes, and we're really not going to be happy that a team that just lost at home to Bert's team came into the Shoe and did that with half a quarterback tied behind her head. Is this James Franklin's long game? Is he making everybody think that they're wounded so he can beat Ohio State finally?
No, I don't think so. That's, it's quite a strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it works. We're
going to sacrifice a shot at the national, the college football playoff to finally get that win over Ohio State. I
think Matt called it better when, I think the injuries, especially to Clifford and Mustafa on the defensive side, the lack of, obviously, the complete lack of confidence in Roberson at the backup. I mean, I think that just speaks volumes. So if I again, James Franklin, I'm sure that they are doing whatever they can to pull out all the stops to beat Ohio State. They haven't had much success, but I just don't see them having enough coming on the road with a less than 100% Sean Clifford and pulling it out.
Yeah, let's see what kind of trickeration they pull out. I'm sure we'll see some trick plays and some interesting change-ups from Penn State. I kind of expect Ohio State to struggle to run the ball early while Penn State's fired up and kind of, ready to get after it. And then I think that as the game wears on and the offensive line settles into the game, I think then they'll start to be able to run the ball a little bit better. And then that's going to open up the passing game. And I expect the big plays through the air to happen more as the game goes along. Now, having said that, who knows? Maybe C.J. Stroud throws a 75-yard touchdown pass on the first play. Who knows? That could happen. This team is that talented.
It is, absolutely. And again, I'm sitting here without really knowing what the weather forecast is, which is why I know I chose the free spot in bingo with Trayvon Henderson, but that's why I really think the running game might be more of a factor.
Yeah, well, it could be. We're heading into Halloween, and so it's not yet time for the gales of November to remember, but it is time for, you have to take weather into account. So I think that's it. I think we've done all that we can do for this week's show. We'll, of course, come back next week. We'll recap what happened with Penn State, and, of course, Ohio State will be getting ready for yet another Big Ten foe as we march on through the season. And we don't know yet, Chip, the Nebraska kickoff time, do we?
No, because it's one of the aggravating aspects of this time of year, the 6-day hold that networks sometimes exercise that option. So it's entirely possible it is entirely possible that we might know, even by kickoff of Penn State, the kickoff time for Nebraska, but it will not be a night game. But Jerry Emig, the Ohio State Sports Information Director, sent out a tweet earlier in the day saying that the game will be either at noon, 3:30, or 4 o'clock. So it leaves it completely up in the air in terms of the network. Like it could be ESPN, ABC, Fox. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But some by trick or treating time on Halloween, put it that way, you will know what the kickoff time is for Nebraska.
Yeah. So we'll come back next week. We'll recap the Penn State game. We'll get ready for Nebraska. We'll see if we can get Erin Sorensen to come back on the show and talk about the Cornhuskers. That'd be fun if we can get her.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And then, of course, we'll have our normal walk through the Big Ten. We'll do all that good stuff, and it'll be a fun walk through the Big Ten, I think, with some of the games that we have this week. So, Chip, before we get out of here, tell people how to find you.
I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich. Last name is spelled Minnich, and I'm a contributor to Athlon Sports. So, obviously, you heard my prediction for the Ohio State-Penn State game, but look for some more in-depth analysis as to players to keep an eye on in an article that will be appearing on athlonsports.com later this week.
Awesome. You can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan. And on Buckeye Scoop, I am known as the Grumpy Old Buckeye. I mean, I still post under my real name, but the column is the Grumpy Old Buckeye. It comes out the morning after every Ohio State game, and sometimes in the afternoon. I don't know when it went up this week, but I looked in the morning and it wasn't up yet, but it was pretty early. You'll find it there, though. Just keep looking. BuckeyeScoop.com. You, of course, want to become an insider and know all the things that we know. That's where you find it. That's where you ask the insiders. Our Ask the Insiders board is amazing. You want to listen to all the BuckeyeScoop.com shows, of course, the Morning Scoop, the Buckeye Weekly, and the Sloopcast, and all of those shows. Just fantastic stuff, especially if you're into recruiting. There's a lot of great recruiting stuff at BuckeyeScoop.com. So if you want to know who's coming up behind Trayveon Henderson, I mean, maybe you should be a little bit more patient and just enjoy what you got, but you'll find out. You'll find out in places like that.
Big recruiting weekend for Ohio State this weekend.
Yeah, should be fun.
I know, on BuckeyeScoop.com, the insiders are detailing, again, a lot of official and as well as unofficial visits. So we could be on commitment watch for maybe not necessarily just the class of 2022, but 2023 as well.
Yeah. And as a reminder, as I said at the top of the show, all my official visits and unofficial visits are going to Ohio State.
There you go.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of the Silver Bullets podcast. Thanks once again to Matt DeBear from RoarLionsRoar.com for stopping by and telling us a little bit about the Nittany Lions. We'll be back next week, and the only thing left for us to do is say, Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!